The last sound she heard, the sound that ripped the world out from under her, wasn't a gunshot, nor a scream. It was the slow, steady, unforgiving rumble of wagon wheels fading into the vast, indifferent silence of the plains. Ilara stood frozen, her hand outstretched towards the emptiness, darkness absolute behind her eyes. They were gone. Jedediah Croft, the settlers she traveled with for weeks, the people bound by her husband's dying wish and payment to see her safe, they had vanished, deliberately leaving her, a blind widow, beneath the merciless western sky. Betrayal coiled cold and heavy in her gut. They thought her helplessness was an anchor dragging them down. They couldn't imagine the spark of resilience buried beneath grief, nor foresee the quiet stranger who would emerge from the wilderness, offering not pity, but a path carved by a gentle, knowing hand through the very heart of the darkness. Life before the endless dark had been painted in the warm colors of love and shared dreams. Ilara and her husband Thomas had envisioned a small patch of land out west, a future built with their own hands, far from the crowded eastern cities. But a swift, brutal fever had swept through their lives like wildfire, stealing Thomas and then, cruelly, stealing Ilara's sight in the aftermath. Grief and blackness became her world. Yet Thomas's final wish, his insistence she pursue their western dream, remained a fragile ember. He'd entrusted her, along with a significant sum, to Jedediah Croft, the wagon master, securing a solemn promise of care on the arduous journey. "He'll see you safe, Ilara," Thomas had whispered, his faith unwavering even as his life faded. So she joined the train, a solitary figure in mourning clothes, navigating the chaotic world of the trail by sound, smell, and the cautious tap of her walking stick. The creak of leather, the lowing oxen, the scent of dust and campfire smoke. These became her landmarks. Initially, Martha Croft, the wagon master's wife, was her anchor, her gentle voice painting descriptions, guiding her steps, offering quiet comfort. Other settlers, too, offered hesitant kindnesses in the early days. But the trail was a harsh teacher, stripping away pleasantries under the relentless sun and dwindling supplies. Patience wore thin. Ilara learned to minimize her needs, to fade into the background, her hearing sharpening, her sense of touch becoming her eyes. Jedediah Croft remained a gruff, distant presence, his voice clipped, his focus solely on mileage and efficiency. Even without seeing his face, Ilara could feel the cold calculation in him, the way he seemed to weigh every soul against the unforgiving demands of the journey. A subtle tension simmered beneath the daily toil, a feeling that the thin veneer of civilization was cracking under the strain. The illusion of community fractured completely at a rocky creek crossing. Guided by an impatient boy, Ilara's foot slipped on slick stone, sending her tumbling into the cold water. The brief chaos, shouts, halting wagons, men pulling her shivering form from the creek, was followed by a heavy, judgmental silence. Jedediah Croft's voice cut through it, sharp as flint. "Can't afford these delays. Wasting daylight. Keep moving." He didn't speak to her, but the accusation hung thick in the air, branding her a liability. She felt the unseen eyes of the others, pity curdling into resentment. They were behind schedule. Resources were tight. Her blindness was no longer just a misfortune. It was a dangerous impediment to their collective survival. Around that time, Martha Croft fell ill, her persistent cough confining her to her wagon, removing Ilara's only real advocate. The small courtesies Ilara depended on evaporated like dew in the morning sun. Hands once offered to guide her were now withdrawn. Conversations abruptly ceased when she approached, resuming in hushed, resentful tones once she passed. She learned to read the strained politeness, the carefully controlled impatience in voices that had once held warmth. The isolation grew, a chilling counterpoint to the oppressive heat. She felt like an island, adrift in a sea of subtle hostility. She overheard Croft near the fire one evening, his voice low but carrying, arguing with another man, Henderson. "Dragging us all down, plain fact, Henderson." Another mouth, slowing the pace when winter's breathing down our necks. This trail demands hard choices. The words were pragmatic, devoid of emotion, chillingly impersonal. A deep cold settled in Alara's bones. Croft didn't see a widow entrusted to his care. He saw a problem on his manifest, a burden threatening the entire enterprise. The promise made to Thomas felt like a cruel joke. Doubt solidified into terrifying certainty. Croft wasn't just impatient. He was capable of ruthlessness masked as necessity. The vast, beautiful land suddenly felt menacing, waiting for Croft to make his hard choice. The question wasn't if, but how and when the final, devastating blow would fall. The days following that overheard conversation were thick with unspoken dread. Alara strained her senses constantly, listening for clues, for the shift in tone that might signal the end. The young man, Billy, who brought her rations, now seemed terrified to meet her unseeing gaze, his hands trembling slightly as he delivered portions that felt undeniably smaller. Was she imagining it? Or was Croft deliberately weakening her, preparing her for the inevitable? She clung to the memory of Thomas's faith, trying to believe Croft couldn't be so monstrous, but the gnawing fear in her gut told a different story. She tried to make herself useful, spending hours mending clothes and canvas by feel alone, her fingers tracing seams and executing neat stitches in the darkness. She listened intently during dwindling campfire gatherings, trying to remain connected, to remind them she was human. But the wall of isolation felt impenetrable. She felt their weariness, their resentment, like a physical weight. Then came the afternoon beside the sun-baked arroyo. The wagons halted under the brutal sun. Croft announced a brief rest. Water the teams. Check your gear. Better water ahead. Need to reach it by nightfall. The air felt heavy, charged. Billy guided her down, his nervousness palpable. He pressed her canteen into her hand. It felt worryingly light. A small cloth bundle landed softly beside her on the ground. Wagon master says, rest up here a bit, ma'am. Billy stammered, avoiding her face. We're just scouting that ridge. Check the way forward. Won't be long. He practically fled, his footsteps crunching rapidly away. Alara stood motionless, the lukewarm canteen a cold weight in her hand, the meager food bundle a symbol of their final, callous calculation. She focused her entire being on listening. The usual camp sounds were muted, hurried. Then the sound she'd been dreading, the groan of multiple axles turning, the sharp crack of whips, gruff shouts urging the oxen forward. Not one wagon scouting all of them. Moving. Leaving. Wait. The cry tore from her raw throat, thin against the immensity. You're leaving me? Wait. Silence. A profound, crushing silence answered her plea. The receding rumble of the wagons grew fainter, then vanished completely, swallowed by the vast, empty quiet. Alone. The truth hit her with physical force, stealing her breath, buckling her knees. Abandoned. Left to die. Tears streamed, hot and futile, tracing paths through the dust on her cheeks. It wasn't just the terror of the wilderness, the impossible odds of surviving blind and alone. It was the calculated cruelty, the ice-cold betrayal by Croft, the silent agreement of everyone who simply drove away. She sank to the harsh ground, the sun beating down like a hammer, the silence pressing in, suffocating her. Thomas's dream dissolved into bitter dust. All that remained was the stark horror of this moment. Blind, alone, forsaken. The wind whispered through the dry grass, a mocking echo of the departed wagons, a final note of betrayal on the empty air. How long could breath last in such desolation? Days blurred under the relentless sun. Alara rationed her water, tiny sip by tiny sip, her throat raw, her lips cracked. The hardtack and dried meat dwindled with terrifying speed. She huddled in the shifting, inadequate shade of thorny bushes, the heat radiating from the earth, searing her skin. Insects buzzed incessantly. Disorientation was a constant threat. Direction dissolved in her darkness. Moving felt perilous. A stumble, a fall, could mean a slow death. Fear, hunger, and thirst wrestled within her. Sleep was fleeting, feverish, haunted by phantom wagons and Croft's harsh voice. Hope withered like desert grass. This desolate place felt like her grave. On the third day, despair a heavy cloak around her, a new sound penetrated the haze of heat and silence. Faint, then clearer. Rhythmic. Footsteps. Soft, deliberate, cautious. Not an animal. Her heart hammered. Had the train returned? Or was this a new danger? She froze, clutching her walking stick, straining to hear. The footsteps stopped nearby. Silence stretched. Then a voice, low, measured, speaking words she didn't understand, guttural yet strangely musical. Navajo. Apache. Terror warred with a desperate flicker of hope. Hello. Her voice was a dry rasp. Is someone there? Please. I need help. More silence. She felt unseen eyes studying her. Then the footsteps resumed, closer, careful. The scent of wood smoke, worn leather, crushed sage reached her. A male presence, intensely observant. He spoke again, in halting, accented English. You are alone. Yes, she whispered. They left me. The wagon train abandoned me. The shame felt raw. A pause. She braced for rejection, suspicion, violence. Why? The single word demanded truth. I am blind, she explained, the words like ash. The wagon master, Mr. Croft, saw me as a burden, slowing them. He said he had to make hard choices. A soft intake of breath. Then the rustle of leather. A waterskin, blessedly heavy, was pressed into her trembling hand. Drink, the stranger said, his voice softening fractionally. Cool, clean water. Life. She drank slowly, gratefully. Tears mingled with the life-saving liquid. When she lowered the skin, he spoke again. My name is Kos. No more explanation. They went that way. He must have indicated west, towards broken mesas. Bad country. Rough. Water scarce there now. He seemed to consider her. Ilara waited, her fate hanging by a thread. Then Kos sat near her, not too close, but ending her utter isolation. He began to speak, his English slow but improving, telling her not of rescue plans, but of himself, of his own solitude. Years ago, watching children near camp, a sudden storm, a dry wash turned torrent, a little girl swept away while his attention was diverted. He searched frantically, consumed by guilt, but found nothing. The shame, the unspoken judgment of his clan, the family's unending grief, it led him to choose this solitary life, tracking, surviving, forever haunted by the memory of that small hand slipping away. Listening to his quiet, painful confession, Ilara felt a wave of understanding. His caution wasn't just suspicion. It was the guardedness of a man carrying deep sorrow. And she sensed a purpose forming in him as he surely observed her vulnerability. Helping her wasn't just charity. It was perhaps a chance to confront his own past failure, to offer the steadfast protection he hadn't given before. A way to restore a piece of his own broken balance. The ones who left you, Kos said, his voice hardening slightly, likely looking towards the faint trail. They chose poorly. This land it does not forgive carelessness or cruelty. He rose smoothly. Come. Shelter nearby. Small cave. Water there. He held out his hand. Hesitantly, Ilara reached out. His hand was firm, calloused, steady. Not impatient, not dismissive. Gentle. Reassuring. A fragile tendril of genuine hope unfurled in her chest. A blind widow and a Navajo outcast, bound by shared solitude. Kos began leading her away, describing the ground beneath her feet, the direction of the wind, the scent of distant rain, beginning to teach her to see the world anew. Under Kos's patient tutelage, the wilderness transformed from a terrifying void into a world rich with sensory detail. He taught her the language of touch, the smooth coolness of water-worn stones, the rough bark of juniper offering shelter, the distinct textures of edible roots versus poisonous leaves. He guided her hands over plants, teaching her to recognize healing herbs by feel and scent. Yarrow for wounds, willow bark for pain. He showed her how to feel the subtle shift in ground density that indicated a game trail, or the slight depression marking a potential water seep. Her feet learned to read the terrain through the vibrations transmitted up her walking stick, sensing loose scree or solid rock before stepping. Her hearing became a map. Coast taught her to pinpoint the chatter of pinyon jays indicating nut-bearing trees, the alarmed cry of a quail warning of nearby movement. The way sound echoed differently off open plains versus canyon walls, allowing her to gauge distance and obstacles. He'd have her sit silently, then describe the layers of sound. The hum of bees near unseen flowers, the distant rumble of thunder signaling a coming storm, the specific cadence of hoofbeats, telling him if it was deer or antelope passing nearby. He spoke often of Hazo, living in balance, respecting the land's power. His own past failure, he explained quietly, was a break in that harmony, a lapse he strove daily to mend through mindful living. Teaching Alara felt like part of that mending. He fashioned her tools, a perfectly balanced walking stick, sensitive to every nuance of the ground, small leather pouches identified by texture. He guided her hands, again and again, showing her how to coax fire from wood using a hand drill, a spark of warmth against the cold desert nights. Each small success, finding water by following the sound of frogs, identifying edible berries by their shape and texture, navigating a rocky slope without his direct touch, built a quiet, powerful confidence. She was still blind, but no longer helpless. She was adapting, surviving, learning to thrive within her darkness. One afternoon, tracking near rocky outcrops, Coast suddenly froze, crouching low, signaling silence. Alara strained her ears, filtering the familiar sounds. Then she heard it too, unnatural, jarring. Splintered wood, the distressed bellow of an ox. They moved cautiously, Coast describing the scene below. A shattered, overturned wagon, contents strewn about. A dead ox, bristling with arrows. Tracks of shod horses, raiders. And fainter, showing panic and haste, the tracks of the main wagon train leading westward, clearly having fled without investigating or helping. Apaches? Comanche? Alara whispered. Raiders, Coast murmured, reading the dust. Hit the stragglers. Took food, maybe guns. Or maybe, his voice held a grim edge. Maybe this wagon was cut loose, slowing them down. He pointed to the main trail heading west, towards jagged blue mesas shimmering ominously. Lost. Croft pushes too hard, knows too little. He avoids known water now, afraid maybe, or just try to make time. He leads them into the maze canyons. Bad place. Cliffs trick the sound. Springs run poison. There was no satisfaction in his voice, only quiet certainty. Croft's arrogance, his cruel pragmatism in abandoning Alara, was now leading the entire train towards disaster, the impartial justice of the wilderness. Alara felt a hollow irony, not vengeful pleasure, while Croft battled the consequences of his choices in a land he disdained. She, the discarded burden, was learning its deepest secrets from a man who embodied its wisdom. Coast looked towards the faint trail vanishing into the treacherous canyons. He could follow, perhaps even help, but his path now lay with Alara. He turned his back on the wagon's desperate tracks. We go south, he stated firmly, to the big river. Safer, more water. Alara nodded, trusting him completely. Her fate was untethered from Croft's. She had survived his betrayal, found an unlikely guide, and unearthed an unexpected strength. Coast's knowledge, born of connection and tempered by sorrow, hadn't just saved her life. It had shown her a new way to see. The true payoff wasn't witnessing Croft's downfall, but her own tenacious blossoming, nurtured by the quiet wisdom of the Navajo tracker. Together, they walked steadily south, leaving the wreckage and the desperate trail behind, moving towards a future defined not by loss, but by resilience found in the wild heart of the West. The journey south brought them to the life-giving artery of a wide, slow river. The air grew softer, carrying the scent of damp earth and cottonwoods. The sounds changed, the gurgle of water, the rustle of leaves, the calls of river birds. Kos continued teaching. How to fish by feel, identify river animal tracks, build shelters from willow and reeds. Ilara shared her past, Thomas, their dreams, her initial despair after blindness. Kos listened with quiet empathy, his silences as meaningful as his words. Sharing eased her grief, making space for the present. For Kos, guiding Ilara felt like a quiet act of restoration. The guilt over the lost child began to lessen, replaced by a sense of purpose fulfilled. Protecting Ilara, seeing her resilience grow, was a balm, a subtle return to Hazo. He hadn't sought redemption, but found a measure of peace in offering kindness and knowledge. As they neared the meeting point, a known river crossing, Kos grew quieter. His task was nearly done. He had led her back to the edge of her world. From here, he said one evening by the fire, traders come. Soldiers sometimes. They can help you reach a town. A pang of apprehension hit Ilara. Leaving Kos felt like stepping back into a different darkness. But she knew his path diverged here. Thank you, Kos, she whispered, her voice thick. You saved my life. You showed me how to live again. He nodded, his silhouette stark against the flames. He had given her more than survival. He had given her back herself. She was no longer just Ilara, the helpless blind widow. She was Ilara, survivor, learner, strong in her unique way. The next morning, sounds of travelers, mules, harnesses, voices in English and Spanish, reached them. Traders. Kos spoke briefly with their leader, explaining Ilara needed passage, omitting the shame of her abandonment. The traders agreed readily enough. As Ilara prepared to leave, Kos pressed something small and smooth into her hand, a delicately carved wooden bird. For listening, he said simply. Remember the sounds that guide you. She clutched the carving, a tangible link to him. I will never forget, she promised. Turning towards the traders, she faced Kos one last time. May you walk in beauty, she whispered, the Navajo blessing, Hazo, a farewell deeper than goodbye. She heard only the soft crunch of his moccasins fading back towards the wilderness. His duty done, his own balance perhaps eased. Ilara reached a dusty frontier town. Life wasn't easy, but her sharpened senses and Kos's teachings served her well. She found work sewing, her fingers reading fabric like script. She navigated the town by sound and feel, the saloon door's creak, the blacksmith's rhythm, the boardwalk's slope, with quiet confidence. She never learned Croft's fate. Did the canyons claim him? Did thirst? Or did he emerge, broken and chastened? It didn't matter. His story was no longer hers. Her story continued, marked by loss but defined by resilience. Blind, yes, but no longer lost. The darkness held vivid memories Kos unlocked. Sun warmth as compass, wind's language, earth's textures, sound symphony. The small wooden bird remained in her pocket, a reminder of the vast West, and the quiet tracker whose gentle hand guided her not just from death, but onto her own path, walked with strength, independence, and a hard-won, enduring peace. The silence she lived in now resonated with survival and the powerful whisper of her own wild spirit.